What influenced the career of Paul Strand, which spanned 6 decades across pictorialism, abstract, modernist, and machine aesthetics in photography, as well as the straight and documentary movements? Strand's own words express devotion to his art, the natural world, and humanity. In this brief presentation, we will consider the education he received at New York City's Ethical Cultural School, his collaboration with fellow artists, and living in isolation far from his home. With his teacher, documentary photographer Louis Hine, Strand visited Alfred Stieglitz at the 291 Gallery. He was also guided by Charles Caffin, another 291 voice. Strand traveled throughout his career, spending considerable time in locations which provided the images in his photographic and cinematographic works. In 1949, Strand left the United States to present his film Native Land in Czechoslovakia. For the next 30 years, he maintained a photographic studio and home in Orgeval, France. The social consciousness instilled in high school led Strand to explore art and progressive causes. When the New York Gallery 291 closed, Strand turned to cinematography for a decade, producing Manhattan, The Plow That Broke the Plains, and Native Land. In 1934, Strand helped found Frontier Films, a documentary film company dedicated to labor causes. He concentrated on images of farmers and villagers in New England and Mexico. He joined with Bernice Abbott to establish the Photo League in New York. Its initial purpose was to provide photographs of union activities and political protests. As you can see on the screen, Strand's photographic work was exhibited internationally during his life in major galleries. The Philadelphia Museum of Art has acquired more than 4,000 of Strand's photographs, and a major exhibition of them will take place later this year. Several images thrust Strand's early work forward. These photos cast aside pictorialist influences and present a post-succession approach in American photographic realism. Influenced by Hine, Strand began experimenting around 1916 with the candid portraits of New York residents. He worked using a handheld camera with a lens which allowed him to point the camera in one direction while photographing at a 90-degree angle. This image of a street vendor integrates the objectivity of social documentation with boldly simple forms of modernism. This image demonstrates abstract elements of New York City's life and conveys the anonymity of humans in the city. Strand characterized these dark windows of Wall Street as sinister windows. Stieglitz embraced these early images and Strand as an avant-garde photographer, inviting him to call 291 his artistic home. Stieglitz presented Strand's work 3 times in quick succession. Many of Strand's works during this time focus on architectural elements and curvilinear still life forms, inspired by Charles Siller. This image was considered an archetype of American society. In it, Strand has created a vantage point with strong boundaries, where principles of materialism, nourished by the desire for individual liberty, separate us from our neighbors. Strand stated that he was horrified by the crassness and brutality of the American scene and the increasing ruthlessness of the material drive. Paul Strand was founder of the Photo League, an association of photographers who advocated social and political causes. They expressed dedication to understanding, interpreting, and expressing human values hidden under the commercial industrial national organization. Strand characterized the ambition as penetrating through the brutality of the American scene and an assertion of the spirit which opposes the increasing ruthlessness of the material drive. This photograph and the 3 to follow it transform architecture, utilizing a vantage point and framing to reveal abstract forms of mass, light, and darkness. It displays Strand's mastery of line, composition, and balance. The towering walls in Wall Street appear even more encompassing here in the court. The landscape is barren of human figures amid canyons of dark physical towers. Humanity appears strikingly absent amid vestibules of capitalism artfully portrayed. After a decade-long venture into the Southwest, Mexico, and cinema photography, Strand turned to photography again in 1943, taking up a project in New England with Nancy Newhall, curator of the New York Modern Art Museum. They co-produced Time in New England. Strand began introducing organic elements into his photos and assessing human communities in the natural landscape. His early candid camera style had been abandoned. Robert Adams observes that Strand understood combining the concrete and the universal as at the center of what makes art important. These images challenge past conventions. Strand has off-centered, otherwise domestic objects to frustrate simplistic expectations. Adams believes that the work took the risk of being free in order to share Strand's concern for the human values he believed were fading in history. McCarthyism was now poisoning the American spirit. Throughout the 1940s and 1950s, America was overwhelmed by the fear of communism. Capitalizing on those fears, Senator Joseph McCarthy led a zealous campaign, ushering in one of the most repressive times in the 20th century American politics. This period hunted and labeled as communist sympathizers over 300 artists who were blacklisted, ending their promising careers. During this time, there were few willing to stand up against McCarthy and the anti-communist fear that it fueled. Strand became a founding member of the Photo League, which did not espouse a particular visual style, but instead focused on integrating formal elements of design and visual aesthetics with the powerful, sympathetic evidence of the human condition. They believed the function of art was to speak to people about the world. It also provided classes in photography, not available in colleges and trade schools. The Photo League was a gathering place like 291 for photographers to share and experience their artistic and social interests. For the majority of the Photo League members, photography was a means of cultural integration into American society, and many became respected photojournalists and professional photographers. However, in 1947, the Photo League was formally declared subversive and placed on the U.S. Department of Justice's blacklist. They were forced to disband in 1951, and Strand emigrated to Europe. In Europe, Strand continued with portraits of subjects looking straight into the camera, not catching some kind of unexpected moment or gesture or clever intrusion of privacy. We look at subjects, not objects, and they look back at us with the same intense interest. This approach was not by accident, and Strand traveled throughout Europe and Africa, embracing his subjects. Strand desired to create images that are socially and humanly equal. Strand visited Italy after it had endured decades of sorrowful losses during several wars. In this image, he portrays the surviving members of an Italian family. Anna Lucetti is surrounded by 5 of her surviving sons. Personal loss, hardship, and downtrodden human spirits are evident. Their individual stories are told in the first-person voice to accompany the images and offer insight into each life. These portraits carry on Strand's efforts to integrate visual design aesthetics with evidence of the human condition. Strand sought to convey human character with dignity and courage. During this period, Strand produced his work in the form of 6 portraits of place: Time in New England, La France, Profil, Un Pays, Tir Mouraine, Living Egypt, Ghana, and an African portrait. Working at a slow pace to his own exacting standard, Strand lived in each of these numerous locales for months. In Scotland, he wandered for weeks on several small isles of the Outer Hebrides to grasp the nature of the people and the place before making a single photograph. Strand's attraction to windows, doorways, and thresholds suggests a relationship between the natural world and our human cultures. He appears to be reflecting, like centuries of observers before him, upon the act of perception itself, what it means to see and open one's mind to the world. Just as Strand avoids the obviously heroic or dramatic in people, he avoids the spectacular, the monumental in nature. Strand's final work is The Garden at Orcaval, produced in 1957. It is a study of forms and patterns within nature. The images bear the same directness and precise vision that is quintessentially Strand. Strand's photographs transformed scenes to sharply focused expressions of objective reality. He also advanced new objectivity and machine aesthetic. His photography and observations made a profound impact on the evolution of photography as a creative medium. Strand pushed social documentary beyond the immediacy of contemporary issues. He demonstrated a lifelong commitment to the worth and dignity of human beings. He explored the camera's potential to exceed human vision, making intimate, detailed portraits and recording the nuances of objects and natural forms. Recognizing the crisis and values that America faced, he influenced the work of Ansel Adams, Dorothea Lange, Walker Evans, Arthur Feliguigi, Henri Cartier-Bresson, Robert Frank, and Robert Adams. Strand believed his work contributed to social justice and to human progress. He never documented despair, disaster, inhumanity, or ugliness, even after being driven from his homeland and the embrace of his associates.